Hey everyone, my name is Morgan Baker and I am a game accessibility specialist and inclusive designer. And today I will be talking about from noise to nuance, a deaf perspective on sound design. Yes, a deaf perspective. How does that work? If you know, you know. If you don't worry about it. We'll talk about that today. But today is a really exciting talk for me because I will be talking about my own player experience. Typically, when I do these type of talks, I'll be talking about my perspective as a dev or a specialist or a designer, but today it's going to be about my capabilities. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. Let's talk about me. First, I am deaf, meaning I can't hear anything at all. When I wake up in the morning, nothing. I was hard of hearing, meaning at one point I could hear a little bit. And before all that, I was hearing too. In fact, deafness itself is a spectrum and it's extremely multivariable, taking into consideration frequency, loudness, and when you throw in other things too, like auditory processing and intersectional disabilities, it can get complicated pretty fast. I've experienced in many aspects of the spectrum itself as being someone who was born hearing with a progressive condition that left me eventually deaf, not hearing anything at all. I've played games throughout this entire process through many different stages, sometimes the same game in several stages, which is kind of a cool phenomenon. But does this mean I'm an expert in all deaf experiences? Absolutely not. Is anyone really? But it does mean I have a fairly unique perspective that I'm going to be talking about today. From there, I am a musician. How does that work? Another day, another conversation. I'm a composer as well, which means I write music myself and I wear cochlear implants. What is that? More on the next slide. I also know American Sign Language. It's part of my accessibility toolkit. And I also like to connect with my community as well using this shared language. And lastly, of course, I make video games sometimes too. In fact, it's my full-time job. But we're not talking about that today. We're here about my experience only. So let's talk about sound then, as in how do I even hear it? How does this work? Well, I don't. I have what's called a sense of sound using a cochlear implant. It's a medical device. It's surgically placed. It has a removable outer processor, which looks kind of like, I don't know if you can see, there's the coil, and here's the processor. This is a battery. It's removable. And basically, I'm a cyborg. In fact, people have called me Cyborg Morg before, and at this point, I've just fully embraced the meme. I was actually the most promising candidate for receiving a cochlear implant. My right side is an extremely high percentile, and my left side is like, meh. Look, it took many months for sound to even work in my cochlear implants, and for some it takes much longer, and for others it might not ever happen. Doctors attribute my success to the fact that I already had a sense of sound. I was hearing before, and so my brain didn't have a lot of like rewiring needing to be done, and also my music abilities as well. They believe that my stronger sense of sound helped a bit, which neat. I'm glad that's helpful. So what the cochlear implant does is that it can create, and I keep calling a sense of sound. It can simulate a very small percentage of sound, which makes perfect sense because your ear has a bazillion receptors. That's a real number, bazillion receptors. And it's helpful for me, but not a perfect solution, of course. It's not a perfect solution for everything, everyone, every day, every moment, and that's okay. I don't wear it every day. I don't wear it every moment, and it's not perfect for every person, too. Often I'm asked, what does a cochlear implant sound like? And to summarize it, I say it sounds kind of robotic, metallic. Speech is considered its forte because the actual thing is designed and engineered to prioritize speech. So one-on-one on a conversation, I'm okay. 1-on-2, we're doing okay. 1-on-3, it's getting harder. And 1-on-4, it's tough. And we'll talk more on why that happens. But it's not really great with like tone, timbre, pitch, dynamics, so like volume. It gets a little borky, but it's still good and helpful for me for what I need it to do. But it can involve more mental processing. I don't have what's called like passive listening. My brain has to always be turned on when I have the cochlear implant, which can lead to fatigue. And everyone has different tolerances for it, and mine is like that. The more that overlaps and the busier the sound is, the less I can perceive and therefore comprehend. And we'll talk more on what that means in a moment. But first, what sounds are in games? Because we're talking about sound in a game and how I perceive it. And so I kind of bucketed it into 5 types of sounds. And there's more, there's less, you can shift it around accordingly, but my talk, my experience, these are my buckets. So the first is speech, or just like voiceover in general, or dialogue between like a main character and several people, or a voiceover with tutorial, whatever. From there we have music, and music can be like background music in a lobby, or it can be like a rhythm game. From there we have sound effects, whether it's like in the actual user interface itself or the gameplay sound effects. And then from there we have like Foley, which is like footsteps, water splashing, and ambience, which is just like the background noise. So like maybe chatter from a crowd or shouting from a crowd or something like that. Sound design is used for, I bucket into 3 concepts, which the first being understanding the story, the dialogue, seeing the characters interact. We have the vibe, so the music sometimes can help us understand what type of vibe we're going for in this moment, or sound effects can be designed in a certain way to convey certain types of vibes. And then there's also the function aspect, so the more practical bit. Look, we're using my terms too, again, lived experience. But sounds can be experiential, sounds can be practical, sounds can be critical to the narrative and the gameplay, and sounds can be secondary and exist only for flavor and flair. It highly depends on the game and can get a little subjective. I'll see people say, oh no, it's not more important for this versus that. Like for example, footsteps is really important in CSGO, but maybe a little less important in Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Depends on the game, and again, someone might disagree with me there. It happens, it's subjective. But when you mash all these things together, I can have a bad time. But here's the frustration, is that I want to experience all of these sounds. I genuinely do. I didn't just get these surgeries for nothing. And remember too, what I talk about today doesn't just benefit someone like me, it benefits many people, because deafness is a spectrum and it's intersectional. And most people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or maybe have auditory processing, will listen to this talk and like nod their head and be like, yeah, me too. And keep in mind, conditions are overlapping. So if you have someone who's like deafblind who needs both the ability to perceive the visuals and the audio to an extent, this is particularly might be relatable to that category as well. So it's all good to consider what we're chatting about right now. So where does the barrier occur then for me? And to name just a few, and I'll mention more as well, the first is what I call the overlapping, and this is kind of like 2-ish things happening. It can be 2 tracks that are like firing at once overlapping, or it can be multiple sounds or sound types within a single track or cue. An example is I can hear a single note fine, but I have trouble deciphering pitch. Keep in mind, that's something that I struggle with. And so if you have multiple sounds within a close pitch range and like similar texture that happens at once, it'll sound like gurgling noise to me. If you pluck a string on a guitar, I can hear that, cool. But if you strum a complicated chord on a guitar, no, it just sounds like a mess to me. If you ask, would you prefer to go to a quartet or a symphony? I will say the quartet, because less is more, which leads me into the next barrier that I experience, which I call it warbling, my word, which basically boils down to basic audio waves are easier for me to perceive and therefore comprehend. Tone, quality, and color, when it gets complex, it's harder for me to perceive. And remember, the ears have a bazillion receptors to capture all of this nuance, and I have just like a teeny tiny bit. And so the cochlear implant either won't perceive it and just completely drop it out, or if the cochlear implant does perceive it, I still can't really distinguish it. It just kind of warbles, it blends, or sometimes I even just mentally filter it out because it's just noise. So deconstructing complex sounds then, A sine wave created by a simple harmonic motion is okay. Most natural sounds, though, unfortunately, vibrate at multiple frequencies simultaneously. And as more individual vibrations, or these harmonics, are introduced, the harder it is for me to decipher. So when you have these harmonics and they constantly interfere and interact with each other, and it hurts when it hits. It hurts, well, it hurts too, but when it hits a certain threshold, it can turn into a warbling, indecipherable noise for me. Which goes into our last section of, I call it the slurring, or when things get too blended together. And it's hard for me sometimes to hear when something starts and stops, especially if you have like overlapping speakers, and if I'm in a room with people, it's hard for me to interject because I can't tell when someone immediately starts and stops speaking. I can like stare at their face, but remember, cognitive processing, my brain's constantly going, and it gets harder when you introduce more people and lots of people speaking, and it gets more complicated with that overlap and many things firing at once. And it's not just like an overlap like this, it can be lots of things that overlap like that and that and that, and it gets confusing. And so an example would be like if you have a lot of very close back-to-back sound effects, they begin to sound like one to me. It slurs, it blends together. And so listening to all this, you may be wondering, well, what type of sounds are hard then? For speech, the cochlear implant tends to be better, but that's not always true if you're talking about someone who has like auditory processing or someone who is hard of hearing and has hearing aids, and not all people with cochlear implants. But for myself, speech tends to be more successful. Music can be difficult, especially as more than one instrument is introduced and the more complex the color and texture of the music is. Sound effects vary a lot between games, likely due to style choices. Foley is fundamentally difficult, similar to speech, how speech should technically be fundamentally difficult because it's speech, but both Foley and speech involve a lot of overlapping frequencies, and so it's fundamentally difficult just in general. And in ambience, again, it varies a lot because it's ambience and it depends on the game and its style. So that's a lot of information. What resolves the barrier? And I say beyond just the output and the volume controls, and we'll talk about, again, resolving the barrier for me. So I also want to talk about, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on, there's like a lot of other solutions as well. So like, for example, we do have like changing the sound to mono output, or beyond like volume changes, like turning music off so I can hear speech better. And there's also like multi-sensory solutions like visualizing sound effects, or like trying to do closed captions so you can hear and then understand at the same time. These are all very good things, but I'm focusing right now on the sound design because the current conclusion is I want to experience it. I want to experience all of it. And so how does that work and how can that happen? And so the three things I'm talking about right now is clarity, simplicity, and consistency. All of these things come together to help make my experience more accessible. In fact, the reason I was brought here today was because I made a tweet about Super Mario RPG where I made reference to the fact basically the game has an option in its menu where you can turn on, it has like this new modern orchestral version of their music, but you can turn a switch to make it its original SNES 16-bit version. And this, to me, is an accessibility feature because I can't perceive the orchestrated version, but I can perceive the original SNES version. Why? Because it has less overlapping, it's very clear, I can distinguish music from sound effects, it's less warbling, it's very simple, it has less complicated cues, it has less variance in the music tracks, so it's more consistent. I sometimes will be playing a game and I'm fine with the music until suddenly we introduce strings and I'm like, oh, great, better go turn off sound or turn off, not all the sound, but turn off music. Or sometimes I just take out my cochlear implant because I'm like, forget it, it's too much for me. But the features like this really do benefit me. And other features may include things like the tinnitus feature in F1 that came out this year, or boosting dialogue in Assassin's Creed. But I also find that when I'm trying to think of examples of features and options that exist, I find that a lot of modern gaming is missing what I need. For example, simplifying sound effects in the user interface or gameplay, boosting certain game critical foley like footsteps in FPS, simplifying music in a rhythm game so I can comprehend it better. Examples of games that do this by design, funny enough, many of them are older games or games that try to mimic older styles. And I actually always think too, I guess because they didn't have many tools, they weren't able to do more complicated sounds. And in a way, I relate to this kind of like 8-bit, 16-bit technology because I can only hear so many sounds and they can only make so many sounds. So we get along great. It's simple, it's simple, clear, it's consistent. I mean, it might even too be a good counterexample. We talk about games becoming more accessible throughout the decades, but this is an example of an emerging technologies creating more exclusionary gameplay for someone such as myself. So anyway, just an interesting side bit there. So basically, I'm leaving this with y'all today that I want to hear sound. Please let me experience sound too. I want to hear speech, I want to hear music, I want to hear sound effects, I want to hear the foley, and I want to hear the ambience. I want to engage in the story and get that sense of the vibe and experience the functionality that comes with sound. And I'm not here to give you a prescription of how do I solve all these problems, but I do hope that by sharing my experience today, it'll help inspire others to maybe think outside the box. So let's keep this conversation going on how we can push sound design to be as accessible as it can. Thank you very much for having me today, and my social media is at momoxmia on every single platform, or my website is leahybaker.com, LEAHYBAKER.com. Thank you so much and have a lovely rest of your conference.